Helen had been paralyzed for 10 years, yet her children were always too busy chasing their own lives, jetting off on vacations, attending parties, indulging in what they called freedom. Me, I stayed. I couldn't walk away. I was the one who sat by her side, day and night, tending to her every need. In the end, she left all her real estate property to her biological children. All I got was the rundown old house on Main Street in Pine Creek. Helen's daughter Sophie never missed a chance to throw a sharp remark my way. To her, I was nothing more than a housekeeper, someone easily ignored, someone beneath acknowledgement. Respect was a currency she never bothered to spend on me. But once I started cleaning out that old house, I stumbled upon things I never expected. That morning, sunlight spilled through the window, casting a gentle glow on Helen's face. Her complexion looked a little brighter than usual. Still, even lifting her voice took everything she had, barely above a whisper. She asked if I could make her a chicken pot pie. I wiped her face, massaged her limbs, all while she kept her eyes on me, as if she had something more she wanted to say, something caught in the space between us. In the kitchen, I set to work, rolling dough, seasoning the filling, measuring out everything by feel. But when I glanced back, I noticed her eyes had drifted upward, locked on the ceiling, unmoving. Once the pie had cooled slightly, I cut it into small bites and fed her slowly, one forkful at a time. She chewed slowly, she always did, and it often took her a long while to finish a meal. But today was different. Her appetite surprised me. Usually she barely made it through a few bites, but today she finished the whole plate, and even asked for some warm broth. She sipped it in small intervals, quiet, but present. "You've got quite the appetite today," I said with a soft chuckle, half to her, half to myself. Somehow that moment gave me a strange sense of comfort. But at 1:52 in the morning, I woke up and noticed something off. Her hand was cold. Panicked, I leaned in to check her breathing, but there was nothing but the echo of silence. I had no choice but to let go, my heart tearing open as I whispered through a tightening throat, "Helen, Mom." She was gone, just hours after finishing her favorite chicken pot pie. At 9 in the morning, Sophie stormed in. The moment she walked through the door, she snapped at me. "What did you do? What did you feed my mom?" For a second I nearly lost it. "You think I did something to her? After all these years, when have you ever truly cared about her? While you were off enjoying your life, I was the one by her side for 10 straight years. And now you show up just to accuse me." My voice was shaking with anger, rising sharper with every word. Sophie shot back coldly, "If you didn't have some ulterior motive, why would you stay all these years?" I stood still, staring at her in silence. My eyes locked on hers, and something in my gaze must have unsettled her, because she quickly shut up. Her husband reached out and grabbed her arm, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. He turned to me and said, "Emma, if you have even a shred of decency, just keep your mouth shut, and make sure Helen gets a proper funeral." The moment the funeral ended, they started fighting over the inheritance. It was chaos, loud voices, bitter arguments, no trace of grief left in the room. They divided up multiple houses, each of them got one in that row of connected properties, and they split the remaining $50,000 in savings, right down the middle. Sometimes the coldness of human nature cuts deeper than a winter wind. Helen had endured a hard life raising 3 children on her own. Her husband died in an accident when he was just 41, and she struggled to provide for her family on a modest corn farm out in the suburbs, managing dozens of acres by herself. 10 years ago, a stroke left her paralyzed. By then my husband David had already walked out on us and vanished without a trace. Back then, Sophie and her brother Jack were still underage. As David's wife, I didn't hesitate. I stepped in to care for his mother. I took on everything, and when they finally grew up and started their own lives, they just dumped all responsibility on me, and never looked back. Of course I've had moments of resentment. She was their mother, after all. How could they be so detached? Their indifference chilled me to the bone. I swore to myself I'd keep going if only to prove them wrong, but now seeing them tear each other apart over money, not one of them offering me a single word of thanks, after a decade of care, I felt like a complete joke. 10 years of devotion, and still I couldn't measure up to her biological children. The bitterness burned in my chest, impossible to shake. But I didn't want to become someone petty or ungrateful, because Helen truly had a kind heart. From the moment I married David, Helen treated me like her own daughter. Every time I came home, she'd already have dinner prepared, even the fruit washed and neatly arranged on the kitchen counter. She was calm, gentle, never impatient. Even when I lost my temper and snapped at her, she'd quietly set a full meal on the table, using tenderness and patience to soothe my worst moods. Her grace often surpassed that of my own mother. During the holidays, Helen would slip a little cash into my hand, saying, "Go buy yourself something nice." She never let me do any hard work. She'd always say, "I'll take care of it." She never pressured me about children either. She'd laugh and say, "Don't be silly. Raising kids isn't every woman's duty. You're still young, enjoy your life. Don't end up like me, giving everything and having nothing left." Back then, I didn't think much of her words, but now I understand. She just wanted me to live a little light. Kindness has its reward, and as long as I can answer to my own conscience, nothing else really matters anymore. The next morning, I sat up in bed just like I always did, only to realize, after a moment's pause, that the house no longer held Helen's breath. Before I could dwell on the silence, a knock came at the door. I barely had time to react when a familiar voice called out from outside. "Emma, you should really think about selling the house Helen left you. I found a buyer. They're offering a generous price, and they're planning to renovate the whole place. Come on, Emma, this house is old and falling apart. It's not safe for you to stay here alone. Why not move out and take the money while you can?" It was Jack, Helen's youngest son, the one who rarely made his presence known. I didn't even bother turning to look at him. "I'm not selling," I said flatly. "Now please leave." "Emma, I'm just trying to help. There's a solid offer on the table. Sophie already sold her place next door. She's smarter than you, clearly. She's already pocketed the money while you're still clinging to this old dump. Think it over, deals like this don't come around often. You'll regret it if you miss out." He didn't even finish his speech, before walking off acting like the house was his to sell. A few days later, the noise started. Heavy machinery roared next door as the house that went to Sophie was demolished. The street shook with the sounds of drills and bulldozers tearing down what was left of the old home. It was loud, jarring, and deeply ironic. If Helen could see this from wherever she was, how heartbroken she'd be. The houses she'd spent her life building for her children didn't even last a week after she was gone. The thought of sharing a wall with strangers made me consider leaving too, but before I did, I wanted to clean the place properly one last time. This was the house my husband David grew up in. Even though he hadn't set foot here in years, I hoped that if he ever did come back, he'd still recognize this little corner of his past. I began putting everything back in its place, room by room, then carrying a bucket of water, I stepped out into the hall. That's when I noticed muddy footprints on the freshly cleaned floor. I frowned. The old wooden floorboards had shifted slightly, worn thin with age. Kneeling down, I pried up one of the loose boards to check for damage and froze. Beneath the floor, tucked in the hollow space, was a stash of $100 bills. My hands trembled as I lowered the board back down, heart racing with disbelief. What was this? Where had the money come from? Did Helen leave it? How had she come by so much cash, and why hide it here? I locked the door behind me, and returned to the spot. Carefully, I opened the compartment again, and began collecting the bills, stacking them into a black trash bag. The money was perfectly bundled, layer after layer. It took me 2 full hours to count it all, 300,000. As I reached to close the floorboards again, I noticed a yellow envelope at the bottom. Inside was a small crumpled note written in Helen's shaky handwriting. "Dear Emma, this money is for you. Stop waiting for David, he's not worth it. Live your life, sweetheart. I've always thought of you, always wished the best for you." My hands trembled as I held the note. My throat tightened, and I couldn't find a single word to say. It was in that moment, the moment I truly accepted that Helen was gone, that the string I'd kept taut inside me for 10 long years finally snapped. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. My cries echoed through the house like a storm breaking. Years of frustration, grief and loneliness poured out of me all at once, leaving nothing behind but raw silence. I don't know how long I cried. Only when my body gave out, did the tears finally stop. I washed my face, stared into the mirror at my swollen eyes, and my gaze drifted toward the black bag behind me. How had she saved so much? Her children had spent years treating her with cold indifference, never even guessing she'd quietly left something like this for me. Those houses they fought over out here, they weren't worth more than $30,000 each. But she had left me 10 times that in cash. That was when it finally hit me. Helen had always seen me as the one person she could truly trust, and in that realization came a wave of all those moments of bitterness I'd carried. How foolish they seemed now. I had never seen that much money in my life. The sheer weight of it overwhelmed me, grateful, nervous, stunned, but I pulled myself together. The first thing I needed to do was get it safely deposited into a bank account. I couldn't live with that kind of money sitting in a trash bag, not when just looking at it sent my pulse into overdrive. That afternoon, I made sure to leave the house during a quieter time of day. The street was unusually silent. Just to be safe, I divided the money into 2 portions, planning to deposit them into separate banks. The whole way there, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, like a pair of eyes lurking in the shadow. But every time I turned around, the street was empty, with only the rustling of fallen leaves carried by the wind. After I finished the deposits and stepped out of the bank, the sun was still spilling warmth across the sidewalk. The scent of food drifted over from the restaurant next door, rich and comforting. I glanced down at my watch. School would be letting out soon, and suddenly a quiet warmth rose in my chest. After David and I got married, we had a son. Ever since he started school, it was my parents who helped with pickup and drop-off, bringing him home to their place in the evenings. All these years, they'd quietly carried the weight of motherhood on my behalf. They're not young anymore, yet they've never once complained. They understood the burdens I was carrying, and never asked for anything in return, just stood by me silently, steadily. Now that Helen was gone, I no longer had to run myself ragged between housework and caregiving. At last I could finally be a mother in the truest sense. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Mom, don't cook tonight. You and Dad pick up Ethan and meet me at Gloucester's restaurant. Dinner's on me." I could hear the shift in her voice right away, lighter, almost cheerful. When I saw them walk into the restaurant, I waved with a smile I hadn't worn in a long time. They smiled back and headed over, faces lit up with warmth. For a moment it felt like stepping back in time, years ago when the 3 of us would go out for meals like this. Hearts full, days simple. I studied my expression, not wanting them to see what I was feeling inside. I hugged my parents tightly, maybe a little too tightly. Ethan squirmed beside me. "Mom, you're squeezing too hard. I can't breathe." I burst out laughing. "Come on, sit down, the food's almost here." Looking at their familiar faces, a wave of tenderness washed over me. Time really does slip through your fingers. The roast chicken and creamy mushroom soup I'd ordered ahead had just been brought to the table. I handed my parents the menu, and urged them to choose a few more dishes they liked, but as always they waved me off. "This is plenty," they said. "We never finish more than this, no need to wait." I tried reassuring them that money wasn't an issue now, but they still refused to order anything extra. No matter how I pressed, they remained as modest and frugal as ever. In that moment I realized true comfort and happiness often come wrapped in the quiet simplicity of a shared meal. Dinner lasted nearly an hour and a half. The restaurant lights were warm and inviting, casting a soft glow over our table while outside the sky had quietly slipped into dusk. I stood up to head to the restroom before we left, but as I turned the corner in the hallway, a voice stopped me cold. "They're sitting there eating and laughing like one big happy family. Just thinking about them spending our money makes me want to walk in there and snatch that bag myself." That voice, I knew it instantly. Natalie, Jack's wife. And one big happy family he was talking about. A chill swept through me. That knowing feeling I'd had all afternoon, the sense of being watched, now had a name and a face. It had been her all along. Natalie and Jack had only been married 6 months. And yet both had already quit their jobs. They were obsessed with get-rich-quick schemes. A few years ago, Natalie made a little money selling insurance, but she hated the grind of actual work. Eventually she gave up on stability altogether. Jack was even worse. He had a gambling problem. The minute money touched his hands, he was off to a poker table, losing every last dollar without a second thought. Natalie had gotten pregnant not long ago, just 2 months in, but between her erratic lifestyle and unhealthy habits, the pregnancy didn't last. "You know, your mother was unbelievably biased." I heard her spit out, seething with resentment. "You're her son and all she left you was that old dump, but the big money she gave it to that outsider. David's probably dead somewhere, and if Emma remarries, that cash is gone. Just hand it over to some stranger. You need to figure out a way to get that money back. Maybe try with Ethan, if you know what I'm talking about." She pressed, her voice sharp and insistent. "You've lost your mind," Jack replied. "That's my nephew. We can't do anything that would hurt him." "So you're just going to sit back and watch Emma burn through all your mother's money?" There was a pause, then Jack said, "Fine, you keep an eye on the street. I'll stick close to them in here. Don't let the chance slip by." My palms were damp with sweat. I pulled out my phone and quietly hit the record button, capturing every word. Then I turned on my heel and hurried back to the table. Mom, Dad, I said gently, why don't you two head home a little early? I'll call a car for you. Ethan and I have something we need to take care of. I kept my tone calm, trying not to let the adrenaline show. As soon as I saw my parents off, I stepped outside, found a quiet corner and called the police. I held Ethan's hand as we left the restaurant, walking down a dim alleyway that led to a side street. It was a quieter route to the nearest police station. The area was nearly deserted, but there was a small convenience store near the exit. A place run by an old friend we'd known for years. If anything went wrong, I hoped he could help. The streetlights behind us grew dimmer as we moved deeper into the alley. I pulled Ethan close, hurrying our pace, but the unease in my chest refused to settle. Every step felt like walking on thin ice. Mom, it's really dark. Did we take the wrong way? Ethan whispered, his voice laced with worry. It's okay, sweetheart. The exit's just ahead. We're almost there, I said, trying to sound calm. That's when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Jack, he was at the end of the alley, pretending to tie his shoelaces, but it was far too deliberate. I knew instantly he'd been waiting for us. I stopped in my tracks and instinctively stepped in front of Ethan, shielding him. Moments later, Natalie emerged from the opposite side, creeping in with a cold glint in her eyes. Emma, she said with a mocking edge. Leaving so soon? We weren't finished talking. I forced myself to stay composed, ignoring the way my heart was pounding. What do you want? If it's money, just say it, Jack spoke up. Since you asked, we want the money you took from the old house. You're insane, You know that money was left to me, it wasn't yours. Natalie let out a bitter laugh. Oh please, you chose to take care of her. That doesn't mean you get everything. I stood taller, gripping my phone tightly. I already called the police. Jack faltered for a moment, his confidence shaken. Don't try to scare us. I'm not bluffing, I said evenly. You think I'd walk down a dark alley with my child and not prepare for this? I called the police the moment I stepped out of the restaurant. They're probably on their way now. The only thing you get to decide is how much trouble you want to be in. The air grew heavy with tension. Natalie hissed under her breath. Jack, she's lying. Cops don't show up that fast. But Jack didn't look so sure anymore. He glanced around, his brows furrowed, his grip tightening around his phone. Just then the bell above the convenience store's door chimed. Someone had entered. James, the store owner, poked his head out from behind the counter, his eyes landing on us immediately. I raised my hand in a small wave, enough to catch his attention. Jack noticed too, and I saw the flicker of panic in his expression. Stop pretending, Emma, Natalie said in a low voice. Even if you called the cops, we still have time. I leaned in slightly, pushing hard. What you've already done is bad enough, but take one more step, and it's kidnapping. You still have a way out, but cross that line and you're criminals. Sweat beaded on Jack's forehead. His hand trembled slightly, as he held his phone. Then James stepped out of the store and looked in our direction. Everything okay over there? He called out. James, yes. I answered quickly. James, could you do me a favor and call the police again? Someone's been following us. I saw the color drain from Natalie's face. Damn it, she really called someone, she hissed, grabbing Jack by the arm. Let's go. But Jack didn't move right away. He stared at me, a storm of uncertainty in his eyes, as if he was still deciding whether to take one last chance. Jack, I said quietly, if there's even a shred of decency left in you, don't make this worse. He hesitated for a second longer, then suddenly turned and bolted, with Natalie right behind him, disappearing down the opposite end of the alley. That's when the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. James gave a full statement, and I handed over the audio recording I'd taken earlier, detailing everything, Natalie stalking us, their conversation in the hallway, they hadn't physically attacked us, but the intimidation and pursuit were enough. The police took it seriously, launching an investigation and beginning the process to summon both of them in for questioning. We'll file a report, one of the female officers told me. I strongly recommend applying for a temporary protective order. I nodded. All I want is for them to stay away from me and my son. Ethan stood beside me the whole time, his small hand gripping mine tightly. He hadn't said a word, but I could feel the slight tremble in his finger. I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. It's okay now, sweetheart. Mom's here. That night, after we got home, Ethan fell asleep in my arms. I brushed a hand through his hair, and listened to his soft, steady breathing. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. And that's when it truly hit me. This home doesn't need anyone else to hold it together. I am this family's foundation now. Early the next morning, I opened the window and heard whispers drifting in from just beyond the yard. Did you hear? Natalie and Jack nearly landed themselves in real trouble last night. No kidding, police got involved in everything. Jack's been drowning in gambling debts for ages. It was bound to happen. Poor Emma, she took care of Helen for 10 years, and now she has to deal with this. She's better off than they are now, with the money Helen left her. She won't have to work another day in her life if she doesn't want to. I didn't step outside, I didn't respond. I just stood at the window, listening as their voices faded into the distance. This town was small, so small, that every ripple became a wave by the time it reached the farthest corner. I didn't need to explain anything, I didn't need to say a word. Sooner or later, everyone would know the truth. Jack and Natalie had become the laughingstock of the entire town, and at the same time they were facing the biggest mess of their lives. People here had always grumbled about Jack's gambling problem, but now that everything had come to light, the sharks started circling. His creditors tightened their grip, and the news spread fast. He'd once managed to juggle things at the poker table, but now no one would give him credit, not even the casinos. Natalie fared even worse. She'd been selling insurance, talked a good game, but never closed a deal. Her numbers were dismal, and now that word had spread, what few leads she had began to disappear. Some neighbors even mocked her to her face. Selling insurance with your reputation? One had snapped. She snapped, posting a dramatic, teary video online, sobbing about how poverty had left her with no choice but to try and reclaim what was rightfully hers. A desperate plea for sympathy. But the comment section was ice cold. Being broke doesn't give you the right to act like a thief. If you're poor, get a job, not someone else's money. It was your sister-in-law who cared for that woman for 10 years, not you. Where do you get the nerve? Her account was soon reported and suspended by the platform for violating content policy. Sophie, meanwhile, had stayed quiet through most of the chaos. But once Jack and Natalie became the town's favorite scandal, she finally cracked and called me. Her voice carried its usual arrogance. Emma, what the hell did you tell everyone? I raised an eyebrow. I didn't tell anyone anything. People figure things out on their own. She scoffed. Don't act so smug. You think you've won? You think you've really cut us off for good? Sophie, I said, my voice calm in a way it had never been before. I stopped caring a long time ago. I've always known how you all saw me. I just used to hold on to a tiny bit of hope, thinking maybe we could still be a family somehow. But now I see it clearly. To you I was just the unpaid help. You want to fight over houses? Go ahead. You want to scream, argue, burn bridges? Be my guest. But from now on, don't come looking for me. And with that I ended the call. 3 days later, a gray suitcase rolled into the train station at Pine Creek. David had returned. He wore a wrinkled trench coat, his face worn and weathered by time, with faint lines of fatigue etched around his eyes. But the cold indifference, the selfishness that had always defined him hadn't changed a bit. He paused briefly on the platform, pulling out his phone to reread the email from Sophie. She's riding high now. Word around town is she inherited all of Mom's money, cash, property, maybe more than that. Are you really going to let her walk away with everything? The message was carefully worded, but every line prodded at David's deepest insecurity. At the end of the email was a photo of me and Ethan bathed in soft sunlight. A peaceful moment between mother and son. But David didn't see warmth or family. What he saw was something else entirely. She's doing too well, he thought. And that comfort, that ease, he didn't believe it should belong to her. His eyes narrowed, a glint of greed flashing beneath the surface. That evening, Sophie met him at a local cafe in town. So you really came back, she said, looking at him across the table. I figured you'd never set foot in this place again. I wasn't planning to, David replied, leaning back in his chair. But your message made me rethink a few things. Sophie gave a short, dry laugh. Rethink, or did you just catch the scent of opportunity? David didn't bother denying it. He'd never hidden his motives, especially when money was involved. You're right, he said flatly. I'm not letting her take everything. That was Mom's money. It belongs to this family. Sophie scoffed. Spare me the noble speech. Where were you all these years? Emma cared for your mother for a decade, and you vanished. I had no obligation to stay, he said, his tone hardening. I left because I knew this place had nothing to offer. Emma chose to stay. That doesn't entitle her to take it all. But you know she has a legal right to that inheritance, Sophie said quietly. which is why I'm not going through legal channels. David leaned in, his voice low and sharp. I'm going for her emotional weak spot. Sophie frowned. You really think she has any emotions left? She's cold as ice now. She shut us all out. Then I'll use Ethan, David said with a slow, bitter smile. Sophie's expression shifted. You're out of your mind. Don't forget, you disappeared right after that kid was born. You've never had a relationship with him. I don't need a real relationship, David said, his voice dripping with bitterness. I just need her to believe I feel a little remorse. A flicker of fatherly guilt. That's all it takes to crack her. Sophie stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head with a hollow laugh. You haven't changed a bit, talking about family, about fairness, when all you really care about is the money. And you're any different? David shot back. The air between them went still. After a few seconds, Sophie said softly, then we have to plan this carefully. We can't push too hard. She's not the same woman she used to be. I know, David replied, rising from his seat. That's why I need you to open the door first. You're still her family. You can get closer than I ever could. When do you plan to show up? The sooner the better, he said with a cold smirk. While she's still lost in her little dream of freedom, I want to give her a sharp dose of reality. That day I had just stepped out of the neighborhood grocery store, a bag of bread and milk swinging gently in my hand. The sun was bright, and early spring flowers were blooming along both sides of the street. I turned the corner and froze in my tracks. There he was, wearing a gray trench coat, dragging an old suitcase behind him. A tired smile stretched across his face. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. It felt like the air had been knocked clean out of my lungs. I honestly thought I was hallucinating. The man who had walked out of our lives a decade ago without a word was suddenly standing right in front of me. And yet my first reaction wasn't anger or tears. It was a deep, cutting sense of unfamiliarity. He spoke first, his voice hoarse but unmistakably familiar. Emma. I instinctively stepped back, stunned. David, is that really you? Even as the words left my mouth, I forced myself to stay composed, but the coldness in my tone surprised even me. What are you doing here? I asked flatly. He smiled, like he had rehearsed this moment. Just wanted to see how things were. I simply lifted the bag in my hand and walked right past him. My spine felt stiff as stone, and I couldn't even bring myself to look back. Out of the corner of my eye I saw him still standing there. He didn't follow, didn't say another word. I didn't turn around, not because I didn't want to but because I didn't dare. That evening, I stood in the kitchen, chopping potatoes, but my mind kept replaying his face. He had more gray in his hair now, deeper lines around his eyes, but that familiar hollow detachment hadn't changed a bit. It pulled me straight back to a life I thought I'd buried long ago. Ethan sat in the living room, working on a puzzle, completely unaware of the storm stirring just beneath the surface. And then it hit me. He didn't even remember what his father looked like. David had been gone for 10 whole years. Me, I had weathered every storm, caring for his mother, raising a child alone, enduring every single hardship. His sudden reappearance wasn't just an intrusion, it felt like a slow, precise kind of torment. 2 days later, David showed up at my door. I didn't let him inside. He stood on the porch with his hands tucked into his pockets, trying to look like some old friend seeking redemption. Emma, I'm not here to cause trouble, he said. I just want to see Ethan. Maybe we could talk sometime. I stared at him for a long moment before speaking. There's nothing left for us to talk about. I'm not here to take anything, he said quickly. These past years haven't been easy for me either. I want to take some responsibility. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Now you remember you're a father? I know I messed up, he said softly, but I really want to make things right. I didn't budge. Kept my voice even. What you think you can give isn't what our son needs. And whatever brought you back, I'll figure it out soon enough. David didn't return in the following days, but I knew he was still around town. I spotted him picking up groceries, sitting quietly in the town square, even loitering near the school route around the time Ethan was dismissed. Mom, Ethan said one afternoon after coming home, some man stopped me today and said he was my dad. The hanger I was holding slipped slightly in my hand, and a sharp chill crawled up my spine. What did you say to him? I asked, studying my voice. I said I didn't remember him. Ethan shrugged. He said I looked just like him, but I don't think I do, and his smile was kind of weird. I knelt down beside him, gently taking his hand. Sweetheart, if you ever run into him again, it's okay to be polite, but you don't have to say much. All right? Ethan nodded. though I could see the questions already beginning to form in his eyes. That evening, the phone rang. It was So you've seen David? Her tone was casual, like she was asking about a neighbor moving away. You knew he was coming back, didn't you? My voice instantly turned colder. He just wanted to see his child, she said after a pause, almost like an afterthought. He's not a bad person, Sophie, I said quietly, my voice dropping low. Don't bother pretending. He disappeared for 10 years. Not a single letter, not a phone call, and now he just happens to show up. Do you really expect me to believe this is some kind of family reunion? You can't be so black and white, Sophie countered. He's still Ethan's father, isn't he? I didn't respond, but in my mind a suspicion was starting to take shape, clearer and stronger by the second. David hadn't just come back on a whim. He'd vanished for an entire decade, as if he'd fallen off the face of the earth. And now, just after his mother passed, and I inherited money, his sudden reappearance was no coincidence. If his real motive was the money, I needed to prepare myself before he made his next move. More than ever I was certain he didn't come back alone. He and Sophie were likely in this together, scheming from the start. Outside, the wind rattled the blinds. I took a deep breath. David was back, but this time I wouldn't be the naive woman who followed wherever others looked. I was no longer the Emma from 10 years ago. Lately Sophie had been showing up in my life more and more, so often that it was becoming impossible to ignore. She didn't speak in that usual condescending tone anymore. She wasn't sharp-tongued or smug. Instead she had suddenly become considerate. She brought me pastries, invited me out for tea, even offered to help sort through old belongings at the house. You've got your hands full raising Ethan and managing the move, she said with a gentle smile. I just thought I'd lend a hand. After all, we're family. But I knew better. That sudden warmth didn't feel like kindness. It felt like a strategy. Sophie was not the type to soften without reason. Every nice gesture, every casual offer of help, was a subtle probe, a needle testing the edges of my defenses. That afternoon we sat in the living room of the old house. Sophie was dusting off a shelf when she casually asked, "So what are you planning to do with this place? The market's pretty good right now. You could make a nice profit if you sold it." "Haven't decided yet," I replied, not even looking up. She tried again, her tone still light. "If you're really attached to it, you could always keep it for Ethan. I mean, it was his grandmother's house. Maybe someday when he's older, he'll want to come back and visit." I didn't answer. I just offered a faint smile. Sensing I wasn't biting, she shifted gear. "By the way, David keeps telling me how much you've changed lately." I looked up. "Of course I've changed." Sophie chuckled softly. "He didn't mean it in a bad way. Just that you've gotten so strong. You take everything on yourself. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to let someone else share the load now and then." She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The implication was crystal clear, and in that moment I understood exactly why she had been circling so close. She was laying the groundwork. They were trying to ease their way back into my life, waiting for the right moment to make their move. That night, I sat alone on the balcony for a long time. I thought about the girl I'd been 10 years ago, the new bride who stepped into this house full of hope, ready to give everything just to feel like she belonged. But now, this house was no longer my home. That man was no longer my husband. He hadn't returned out of love or remorse. He'd come back for money. That bitter truth didn't surprise me, but somehow it still left a cold ache in my chest. The next day I took Ethan to the town's children's library. We sat in the reading area, and he quietly flipped through a picture book about galaxies and I watched him from beside the shelf, taking in the calm, focused look on his little face. "Mom?" He suddenly turned to me. "Do you think that man really wants to spend time with me?" I paused, caught off guard. What did he say? "He keeps asking me what I like, what I want," Ethan said seriously, "but he never asks how my day was." My eyes stung. "Sweetheart, do you like him?" I asked softly. He shook his head and turned back to his book, and in that moment I understood. He may still be young, but he could feel it. He could tell who genuinely loved him, and who didn't. Later that afternoon, back at home, I pulled out the paperwork Helen had left me: inheritance documents, bank records, trust fund proposals, financial planning notes. I reviewed every detail, and backed everything up. That money needed protection, not just for me, but for Ethan. I scheduled a meeting with my attorney. It was time to update all my financial documents. I wanted to establish a trust fund solely for Ethan, naming him as the only beneficiary. I added an explicit guardian exclusion clause, legally blocking any third party, including his father, from accessing or influencing the account in any way. I wasn't going to wait for David to make his move. I'd already made mine. Until everything came to light, I had no intention of confronting them directly. I would keep living, keep smiling, even keep entertaining Sophie's kindness and David's remorse. What they didn't know was I wasn't following their script anymore. Every move they made, I was already 3 steps ahead. I would wait calmly, patiently until the mask finally slipped. The late spring breeze had begun to carry a restless heat, and I could sense David growing more impatient by the day. For weeks he had kept up the act, controlled, polite, even helpful. He'd show up along Ethan's route from school, bring me a cup of coffee now and then, play the role of the well-meaning ex at community events. It was seamless, like he truly wanted to be part of his son's life. But I knew better. This was all set up. He was waiting for me to lower my guard, to let him in, to eventually open the door to that money. What he didn't know was the door had already been sealed shut. That day, I received a call from the bank. "Hello, Ms. Emma Jones. We received a request from a Ms. David Jones claiming to be a legal guardian of Ethan Jones. He's requested access to the trust fund details and submitted an application to initiate a withdrawal." My knuckles turned white around the phone. "No one is authorized to access that account," I said calmly. "The fund was established with me as the sole trustee, and there's a clause explicitly excluding his father from any financial authority." There was a brief pause before the voice on the other end replied, now firm and formal. "Understood. We've reviewed the documents. Everything is in order. Rest assured, all control remains in your hands." I hung up the phone, not with satisfaction, but with a steady sense of resolve. David had finally made his move. Less than 30 minutes later, my attorney forwarded a copy of the bank's official denial letter. It outlined the fund's terms in black and white, directly addressed to David. To the applicant, in accordance with the trust founder's wishes and contractual terms, you hold no authority over this fund. Do not submit further invalid requests. I could almost picture the look on David's face as he read it. He had calculated everything, except for the fact that I was no longer the woman he could manipulate. The next day, Sophie showed up at my door. The moment she walked in, she got right to the point. You had expected all this, didn't you?" I didn't respond. I simply set a glass of water on the table. She clenched her jaw. "You're ruthless." "This isn't ruthlessness," I said calmly. "It's protection." She stared at me, but her voice lacked its usual force. "You think you've won? David isn't the kind of man who gives up easily. He can fight all he wants," I said quietly, "but he'll never get a cent. What you're trying to take was never yours to begin with." Sophie stood abruptly, her tone turning sharp. "Don't get too full of yourself." I gave a faint smile. "I'm not. You were the ones who thought this would be easy." She slammed the door behind her, leaving a trace of bitterness and frustration in the air. A few days later, I saw David outside the grocery store. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. His face drawn, his eyes clouded with fatigue and defeat. The man who once walked out of our home with his chest puffed in confidence, oozing from every word, now looked like a worn-out shadow of himself. He spotted me and took a tentative step forward, then stopped, unsure. I stood still, watching him calmly. "You won, Emma," he said quietly, his voice rough, his throat tightening around the words. "No," I replied evenly. "You were just too greedy. This was never a competition. You've simply never understood that some things can't be taken by force or manipulation." His gaze dropped to the ground. It took him a moment to speak again. "I thought maybe I could still hold on to something. You once had a whole family." I said softly, "You were the one who walked away. If you have nothing now, it's because you chose that." David didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. The fight had drained out of him. He stayed in town a few more days, then quietly packed his things and left. No grand goodbye, no drama, just disappeared, the same way he did all those years ago. Sophie never showed up again. The two who had once tried so hard to unravel my life were finally gone for good. A few days later, I started getting involved in community activities. For so many years I had handled everything on my own, quiet, invisible, keeping my head down, but now I was stepping out, not to please anyone, but because I had finally realized I had every right to choose the life I wanted. The local library was looking for volunteers. I signed up. The neighborhood association needed help with event planning. I showed up to arrange tables and hang decorations. The Children's Arts Center asked for parent helpers. I became one of the regular. "You're always so thoughtful, Susan," one of the organizers said warmly. "With you around, everything just runs smoother." I smiled lightly. Maybe I'm just used to taking care of people. But what Susan didn't see was that this time, my smile felt lighter than it had in years. Ethan too had started to adjust to this new chapter. His emotions had settled. He seemed more at ease, more open. Every afternoon after school, he'd come home bubbling with stories. Who said what in class, what game they played at recess. Last week he brought home a certificate for excellence on a math quiz. I hung it proudly on the refrigerator door, and found myself glancing at it every time I passed by. In the evenings he would sit quietly at the desk doing homework while I worked beside him, going over notes for a project I'd been thinking about for months. I wanted to open a small home-based consulting service, something that used the caregiving skills I'd spent years building, a place where women like me, overwhelmed and forgotten, could come for guidance, support, and maybe just a listening ear. It wasn't just about making money, it was about offering something I had once so desperately needed. I reached out to an old friend who now worked in family service. She was leading a community program, focused on rebuilding broken family relationships. "You really want to do this?" she asked, a bit surprised. "I want to try," I said with a nod. There was a time when I wished someone would reach out and pull me out of the dark. Now I want to be that hand for someone else. She reached over and squeezed my hand gently. "You've changed, Emma. You've grown into someone stronger, someone better." I didn't say anything, I just smiled. Time moved quietly forward, like nothing had happened, and yet as if everything had changed. The trees along the street had begun to sprout tender new leaves. Sunlight spilled across the windowsill, and the air carried the soft scent of early summer. In the kitchen I brewed a cup of black tea. The house was still filled with only the gentle sound of the kettle simmering. Ethan sat at his desk, writing. The sunlight touched his shoulders, casting a golden hue across his notebook. He scribbled with focused concentration, occasionally tilting his head to think before continuing on. He had grown taller, his features slowly shedding their childhood softness, growing sharper, calmer, more defined. This was my life now, simple, quiet, free of unnecessary people, and free of unnecessary emotions. That afternoon, Ethan and I took a walk through the community garden. He held my hand tightly, chattering all the way about the new art class at school, telling me how he had drawn a huge tree with a little bird's nest made from cut paper. "Mom, did you like drawing when you were little?" "I did," I said with a smile, "but I wasn't very good at it." "I bet your drawings were way better than mine," he said earnestly. I knelt down and hugged him. "But your tree is the best I've ever seen." He laughed light and bright, then tugged me along as we kept walking. Sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering across the path in soft flickering patterns. My steps were steady, unhurried, just like life itself now, no longer rushed, no longer lost. That evening, we cooked dinner together in the kitchen. He washed the vegetables while I stood at the stove. On the table sat his drawing of the big tree, which I'd pinned onto the refrigerator with a magnet. "When you grow up, this drawing will still be here." "Really, really?" he asked, his eyes wide. "It'll remind me there was once a little boy in this kitchen, washing vegetables, laughing, telling stories," I said. His eyes sparkled. Then he said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll protect you just like you protect me now." My heart caught for a moment. My hands paused over the skillet. Then I smiled and nodded. "Deal. We have a promise." Late at night, the house fell into a gentle hush. I sat alone on the balcony, the tea in my hand long gone cold. The streetlights glowed softly in the distance, and now and then a night bird called out in the dark. I closed my eyes and thought of every step I had taken to get here, the pain, the struggle, the lonely days I had carried all by myself, now softened like ripples on the surface of water, slowly smoothed by time. I no longer needed anyone's validation. I no longer needed anyone's apology. I had learned how to tuck the pain away in the quiet corners of my memory and still move forward, still live my life. From inside I could hear Ethan's gentle breathing. It was the most comforting sound in my world. And in a quiet whisper, meant only for myself, I said, "I'm truly home in my own life." The night breeze lifted the curtains. I rose slowly and closed the window behind me. It was a house that finally fully belonged to me.